This is Karel Kot. Here he is, seen smirking as he films reenactments of his crimes for police. Although he knew right from wrong, he chose to be evil. He took great pleasure in this and never shown any remorse for his horrific crimes. He terrorized the streets of Krakow, selecting his victims seemingly at random, all whilst he was still in school. His insatiable thirst for blood, combined with his complete inability to connect to others, twisted his methods of murder into something extremely deviant. And even once he was arrested, he laughed and still taunted his surviving victims. Whilst in prison, the young man, dubbed the Vampire of Krakow, didn't beg for mercy. Instead, he said, "I should never be freed, as I will kill again." By age 20, Karel Kot had stood trial for multiple murders and attempted murders, most of which happened when he was still at school. Just so young to be having such dark thoughts and desires, even going as far as to show the police his enjoyment of licking the blood off his knife. It's shocking. But before we dive in, if you find this video fascinating, then please drop it a like and leave me a comment below. And if you are new here, then please hit the subscribe button and consider following me on Instagram. It all really helps. Thank you. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse or condone the criminal actions described within. Karel Kot was born on December 18th, 1946 in Krakow, Poland. He grew up in what seemed like the perfect family, middle class, comfortable and loving. His father was an engineer and his mother was a devoted homemaker who tended to his every need. To anyone looking in, there seemed to be nothing unusual about young Kot. He was quiet, polite, and a fairly average student. Nothing about him hinted at what was to come. But everything began to change when he was 8 years old, the year his sister was born. Until then, he'd been the center of his parents' world. Now, suddenly, he wasn't. Kot felt replaced. He claimed his parents loved her more and that he was being pushed aside, though his parents would later insist that they treated them both equally. Still, for Kot, something dark was forming. When things didn't go his way, he turned to violence. He began lashing out at his younger sister, hitting her with a belt when no one was around, taunting her whenever he could. It was the beginning of a pattern, one that would define the rest of his life. As the years passed, Kot became withdrawn and cold. During later interrogations, he later admitted that even as a youth, he started to despise his own family. Whether it was jealousy or a deep emotional fracture, he was learning early that pain, especially other people's pain, made him feel powerful. Now there's a little bit of animal cruelty coming up, and I know some people appreciate a warning, so maybe skip over a little bit if this affects you. Eventually, that cruelty turned towards the family pets. The 2 house cats became his new victims. He would beat them and throw them against walls. He enjoyed watching their fear and pain, as if it satisfied something inside him. Another key turning point came when Kot was 10. The family holidayed in the picturesque village of Pichet. It had mountains, places for hiking, sports. It was the kind of place you'd expect childhood memories to be made. But Kot's memory of it was different. He begged his parents to take him to the slaughterhouse. Why they agreed is unclear, but once inside, something in him lit up. When he was there, he found a true passion in life: blood. He became obsessed. Day after day, he watched animals being slaughtered, and to everyone's shock, he was fascinated by watching the blood come out of a body that was just alive moments before. The staff at the slaughterhouse wanted to challenge him. They dared him to drink a cup of fresh blood that had just come from a calf. Cott drank the lot. The men meant to scare him off. Instead, they were the ones who were unsettled. On later visits, he even helped slaughter a pig, and this time he brought his own cup to fill up with blood from the wound on its neck. Again, he drank it all. From these moments, Cott's fascination with blood became an obsession. When home, he would visit butchers and other slaughterhouses in his free time. This is what stimulated his young mind. He enjoyed looking at it, smelling it, and tasting it. Now in his early teens, he moved on to torturing animals in the woods, smaller animals like moles, frogs, and different kinds of birds, animals that would not be a physical threat to him, ones that he could assert dominance over. He would also continue to drink their blood. Around this time, another obsession took hold: knives. Cott later called them his true love. The fantasy that had once been for only animal victims began to creep towards humans. He pictured himself stabbing a person in real life, but for now it remained a fantasy. But the boundary he would cross someday was getting closer. At school, Cott began to let glimpses of his twisted imagination show. He spoke openly about violent fantasies, about torturing people, wanting to stab them, and one time, a former classmate said of when he went into detail. They claimed Cott's biggest desire was to stab a female, disembowel her, and wrap her intestines around her neck, then force himself on her. What kind of sick mind thinks of this? He also started behaving inappropriately towards females in his class, crossing boundaries, touching them without consent, and making them feel deeply uncomfortable. Before long, his classmates had turned on him completely, and he got the nickname Intimate Maniac. I'm using the word intimate to replace an obvious word. Yet, to teachers, Cott seemed quiet, polite, and even withdrawn. Just like at home, he knew exactly when to hide the darkness inside him. He knew how to manipulate situations. His odd fascinations continued to grow. Cott went on a school trip to Auschwitz, and instead of being moved and horrified by what he seen, he was inspired. He told friends that one day he wanted to be like the soldiers who'd worked there, that he'd have his own camp, with his own victims and gas chamber. Sure, this was just a fantasy, but they consumed him. His thoughts were murders, assaults, and concentration camps. Very dark. Cott found somewhere to belong, at a shooting club. He was good, ranked 10th in Poland in the junior ranks, and for a while it was one of the few places he fit in. His coach even asked him to help teach his son to improve his shot. It looked like something positive in an otherwise dark life. At the club, he met Danusia Wodaszek, a 21-year-old art student, 6 years his senior. To her, Cott was just an awkward friend, but to him, she became an obsession. He told her things he shouldn't have, the cruel acts he committed on animals, the fantasies that lived in his head, but Danusia laughed them off as a sick joke. She didn't believe him. For Cott, it's someone he can relive things with. Even his social awkwardness doesn't seem to put her off. But it was also this social awkwardness that made him frustrated with her. He couldn't bring himself to tell her that he liked her and wanted to be intimate. So what does he do? First, he tells her that he will kill her and then force himself on her remains. But she just thinks it's a sick joke. But when the urges get too much for him to handle, he attacks Danusia. He threw her to the ground and began to strangle her. Then he stood up over her and pulled out a shard of broken glass out of his pocket and told her that he was going to slit her wrists and throw her in the river and make it look like she had ended everything. But her response to this attack was not what Cott was expecting. She laughed at him and said, "Well, everyone knows we were together, so if you kill me, you will definitely be caught quickly." Cott takes a second to reflect on what she said, and he stands down. Danusha was unaware that she was very close to death, but her calm reaction most certainly saved her life. She actually just thought he was immature. Weeks passed. Cott lived at the shooting range, firing for hours, honing his aim. He moved on from torturing small animals. Now he aimed at the buildings near the club, imagining targets were the people living inside. At 15, he realized something terrifying. He had access to rifles and thousands of rounds of ammunition. He thought he could wipe out everyone in one of those buildings. It excited him. But the fantasy didn't unfold the way he planned. His first real attack wouldn't come from a rifle. Instead, he chose a knife. It was intimate, up close. On September 21st, 1964, Cott felt what he later described as an uncontrollable urge to kill. He wandered the streets of Krakow with a knife hidden beneath his coat, searching for someone small, someone harmless, the kind of victim he believed wouldn't fight back. When no one seemed right, another idea crept in: a church. People went there alone, in silence, with their eyes closed. It would be easy prey, he thought. Inside, he waited, but no one came. Just as he was about to give up, the door creaked open. A woman entered, 48-year-old Helena Benson. She noticed a young man in a raincoat sitting near the altar with his head bowed in prayer. Nothing seemed unusual. As Helena knelt and closed her eyes, she heard a faint shuffle of footsteps behind her. Then, a sharp, sudden impact. She thought she'd been punched, but in reality, Cott had stabbed her in the back, aiming straight for her heart. She fell forward as Cott turned and ran away, and Helena watched him as he made his escape. Outside, Cott licked the blood from his blade. Later, he said the feeling thrilled him. It was like a rush unlike anything else. Inside the church, Helena was shaken. She was in pain, but she didn't realize she had been stabbed. She could handle the pain, and remarkably, she got up and carried on about her day. It was only when she went to do some shopping after leaving the church that someone told her that there was blood all over her back. Fortunately, the stabbing did not hit any vital organs, and Helena was able to make a full recovery. Although it was reported to the police, and she gave a description of a young man wearing a raincoat, but there was initially no leads. This attack underlined how juvenile Cott still was. Only 15. He didn't grasp the reality of what he'd done. He believed a single stab meant death. In his mind, he'd already killed. The rush he felt was addicting, so much so that his next attack would happen just 2 days later. He spotted 78-year-old Francesca Lewandowska getting off the tram. She was alone, and most importantly, vulnerable. He followed her through the streets until she entered her apartment building. Cott entered behind her and instantly attacked. As Francesca was about to walk up the stairs, Cott stabbed her in the chest area and then span her around and stabbed her in the back. This time though, Francesca knew she was being stabbed. She screamed loudly, begging for help, and this startled Cott, who quickly ran away, leaving his victim. Neighbors soon came out and helped Francesca, and although she would survive her attack, one of the stab wounds hit her spine, and she was never able to walk unassisted again. She gave the description of her attacker. Again, it was a young man wearing a raincoat. Officers quickly linked the two crimes, and soon word spread that there was someone attacking women in the area. Fear began to consume the people of Krakow. Then the media got involved, and Cott loved the attention his crimes were receiving. But there was one problem: both women survived, and this angered him. So he bought a book on human anatomy and studied where the main arteries are and where best to stab. He marked key points in pencil and sometimes with a knife. He was literally studying to become a better killer. He wanted to become more efficient and a more violent killer. Just 6 days after his last attack, on September 29, 1964, Cott was out hunting again. This time, he spotted another elderly woman, 86-year-old Maria Plitia. She was standing outside a nunnery. He watched as she went inside. Then he followed. The building was quiet, empty. It was perfect. Once he was sure they were alone, he drew his knife and struck. The blade drove into Maria's back with far more force than before. This time, he was aiming for her lungs. She screamed and turned, just long enough to see his face before collapsing. But Cott doesn't stab her again. Instead, he flees the scene. Moments later, the nuns found Maria lying in a pool of blood. Before losing consciousness, she whispered faintly, "He was young." She was rushed to hospital and was fighting for her life. News spread quickly. Another woman had been stabbed in Krakow. Fear was now turning into panic. Later that same day, after hearing she was still alive, Cott had the audacity to walk into the hospital and ask about her condition, pretending to be concerned. Maria died that evening, not from the wound itself, but from cardiac arrest brought on by the pain and shock of the attack. The coroner said the injury wasn't fatal, but her heart simply couldn't take it. Tragic. Krakow was now gripped by fear. The city was in full panic mode. Headlines were about the mystery stabber, and police flooded the streets searching for a young man. Women were told not to walk alone, and the fear ran so deep that when going to church, some people began placing baking trays or metal plates beneath their clothes for protection. Others stopped going to church altogether, too terrified to pray in peace. Police pleaded with the public for help, but the only description they had was vague: a young male. Every day, new reports came in, people claiming they were being followed, suspicious figures here and there. Officers made arrests, but each time the suspect turned out to be innocent. And through all of it, no one suspected the quiet, well-mannered Carol Cott, the shy student who blended in so perfectly into the crowd. Now maybe because of the intense scrutiny on the case, or maybe he simply wanted to try something different, but Cott would stop killing people with a knife. He changed his MO, and for the next 17 months, he went to school as normal. He carried on at his shooting club, and by all accounts, he had gotten away with murder, but the burning desire to kill was still inside him. So, for the next few months, he tried to kill people in different ways. One of them was by putting poison in bottles of vinegar in cafes, in the hopes that someone would use it and die. But miraculously, this didn't work. Another was lacing beers in pubs with the same substance and leaving them on bars. He would sit nearby and wait to see if he could watch someone drink it. But his plans were amateurish. People don't just grab drinks off the table and drink them. So next, he tried arson, hoping a fire would kill many people at once. But he couldn't get a blaze to spread beyond a single room. Time and time again, his schemes failed. All the while, he kept studying anatomy, penciling diagrams and learning where the blade would end a life the quickest. His frustrations grew as the city relaxed and their fears eased. Krakow believed the threat had faded, but they were wrong. Cott had only been failing to kill until he decided to stop failing. He was ready to go back to what he knew worked before, and when he did, the city would remember why they had been so frightened in the first place. On February 13th, 1966, Cott made his way to a sledging competition at Kosciuszko Mound. He wasn't there for the fun or the crowds. He was hunting. He knew there would be plenty of youths there who were small, distracted, and most of all, vulnerable. Then, Cott spotted 11-year-old Leszek Kellick. He was late and walking alone. Cott followed him, closing in with each step until he was right behind him. Without a word, he grabbed the youth and dragged him into the bushes. What happened next was pure brutality. Cott pulled out his knife and stabbed Leszek 11 times. Each thrust was precise, hitting the heart, lungs, liver and throat, exactly where he'd studied to strike. In fact, it would later turn out that every vital organ had been stabbed. Leszek didn't stand a chance. The only saving grace was that he would have died quickly. But this was a huge escalation in Cott's crimes. He was no longer stabbing victims once and running away. Now he was sure of what he was doing and staying until he felt the victim was dead. When the frenzy ended, Cott simply stood over his victim for a moment, breathing heavily. Then he walked away as if nothing had happened. Minutes later, he bought himself a piece of cake to eat at home. This was his way of celebrating the kill. There was no panic, no guilt, just a quiet satisfaction in what he had done. The murder was so brutal that police refused to release the full details, but word quickly spread, whispers of a youth butchered, of a killer lurking near the mound. Fear gripped Krakow once again. No one felt safe, and no one could understand how a monster could walk amongst them so calmly. Worst of all, the local people felt they were being lied to, and that there were many more victims they didn't know about. Cott was proud of what he'd done, disturbingly proud, but he had no one to share his secret with, except Danusha. He told her everything, describing in brutal detail how he killed Leszek. He expected her to be impressed, but Danusha just laughed it off. The news hadn't released any details of the murder, so she assumed it was just another one of his sick jokes. Just some dark talk from a strange but harmless person. She simply didn't believe her friend, who was shy and a little odd, could ever be a brutal serial killer. Meanwhile, Krakow was on edge. The authorities were desperate, scouring the city for a killer they didn't understand. It was the 1960s, and all they knew was that their suspect was a young male. They even brought in the military to help, but no matter how many searches they ran, the killer always remained elusive. 2 months later, on April 14th, 1966, Cott struck again. It happened inside an apartment building. No one knows exactly why he was there. Perhaps he'd been hiding, waiting for the right victim to appear. Whatever the reason, he soon came face to face with a 7-year-old female called Malgorzata. She had just left her parents' apartment to post a letter in the postbox downstairs, but she never made it. As soon as she turned the corner, she ran straight into Cott. He grabbed her instantly. Before she could scream, he stabbed her again and again, a total of 8 times in the chest, stomach and back. It was fast, frenzied and utterly merciless. Cott fled the scene, leaving the youth bleeding on the floor. But against all odds, Malgorzata survived. She was horribly wounded and deeply traumatized, but alive. She later gave police a description of her attacker, but it did little to help the investigation. This time though, the media didn't hold back. The story exploded across Krakow. People realized the killer from the year before had now returned. And now he wasn't just targeting the elderly, he was hunting the youth as well. Panic spread through the city once more. Undercover officers were deployed everywhere, in parks, churches, and crowded streets, waiting for the killer to slip up. Cott was proud of his latest attack, The chaos, the panic, the headlines, it all thrilled him. He loved knowing the city of Krakow was living in fear because of him. Once again, he went to Danusia eager to brag. He told her everything, how he'd attacked the youth, how it felt, how she screamed. He spoke with excitement, wanting to shock her and impress her. But like before, Danusia just laughed it off. She thought it was another one of his disturbing stories, just some twisted jokes to try and seem edgy. But that changed when she read the newspaper. All the details matched what he had told her. The realization hit her like a wave. Her quiet, awkward friend wasn't joking. He was the killer. Danusia went straight to the police. It was the break the investigators had been waiting for. They immediately placed Kot under surveillance, and it didn't take long to confirm their suspicions. He matched every description the surviving victims had given. The same build, the same face, the same cold stare. For 3 months, they followed his every move. He was still attending school, still acting like a normal teenager. The detectives wanted to be sure. They needed to prove he understood right from wrong. They feared he may plead insanity if they arrested him now. But if he graduated school, they felt it would be harder for him to do this, so they waited until after his final exam to arrest him. It was a dangerous gamble. They knew he might strike again. Then, on July 1st, 1966, as he walked out of school after finishing his last exam, officers surrounded him there at the school. Karol Kot, the so-called vampire of Krakow, was finally in custody. The city was stunned. This killer, who had haunted them for nearly 2 years, wasn't some shadowy figure hiding in the night. He was a scrawny, soft-spoken teenager. He was still at school. How could this young man have terrorized the entire city for so long? At first, Kot denied everything. He acted confused, calm, almost bored. He claimed he knew nothing about the murders or the victims. His parents were horrified, insisting there had to be some kind of mistake. Even his shooting instructor wrote a letter to the police vouching for his good character. To everyone who knew him, Karol Kot was just a shy, polite young man, not a sadistic killer. But any doubt vanished when 2 of his surviving victims identified him in a police lineup. One of them, 78-year-old Francesca Lewandowski, pointed directly at him. Without hesitation, Kot shouted, and quote, "You have a good memory. Come here and I'll finish you off." That was the moment the mask dropped. After that, Kot stopped pretending. He became an open book, eager, even proud to talk about what he'd done. He told investigators about his lust for blood, about how he loved licking it from his knives. He said, and quote, "The pleasure when the knife cuts through flesh, it's impossible to describe." It was then that the press gave him the infamous name, the Vampire of Krakow, and he loved it. The attention fed his ego. It made him feel powerful. During crime reconstructions, Kot behaved like a director on a movie set. He grinned, gave camera directions, and told police where to stand and how to hold the lights. There was no remorse, no fear, only pride. He demonstrated how he poisoned drinks in cafes and how he stabbed his victims, often smiling as he did so. At one point, an officer asked him, "How does it feel to relive your crimes?" Kot looked up, smiled, and replied, "Good, but there's one thing missing, the blood." On May 3rd, 1967, the now 17-year-old Karol Kot finally faced trial. By then, he had undergone multiple psychological evaluations. Some experts believed he was completely insane, while others argued he was perfectly aware of what he was doing. In the end, the court ruled that he was fit to stand trial. 64 witnesses took to the stand. Neighbours, friends, and even teachers, some spoke in his defence, still convinced that the quiet youth they knew could never be capable of such horrors. But Cott didn't care. He smiled through it all. He laughed when his friends had to talk about him. He waved to people in the audience. To him, this wasn't judgment, it was a stage, and he was the star. When it was his turn to speak, Cott began by mocking the letter his shooting instructor had written to defend him. He said, and quote, "He had no idea his own son was on my hit list. He told the court he was a murderer and he didn't regret a thing, but he refused to call himself evil. In his warped logic, morality was subjective, a matter of opinion. He said, people who sleep with street workers, they're evil, not me." Then came his most chilling words. "Suffering is a work of art. Inflicting pain on someone is beautiful. Not everyone can do it." There was no remorse, no empathy. On July 14th, 1967, Carol Cott was sentenced to death. His defense team appealed, claiming he suffered from severe psychological illnesses and that he was still a youth when he killed. For a time, they succeeded, and the sentence was reduced to life imprisonment. But the public was outraged. Poland demanded justice. Under mounting pressure, the court reinstated the death penalty. On May 16, 1968, the vampire of Krakow was executed by hanging. Even at the end, he showed no fear and no regret. Just days before his death, Cott gave an interview to the press where he said, "If I was ever to be free, I would kill again." It's not only the lack of remorse in his crimes that shocks me, but also the lack of care for his own life. Even the worst killers still try to protect themselves in some way once they have been apprehended. But Cott did none of this. He was horrific till the very end. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane.